Hi, and welcome to a video celebrating the 150th anniversary of Grand County, Colorado. My name is Mark Gaffman, and I've been doing these then and now pictures for about 15 years, and I have them on a Facebook page called Colorado Then and Now Photos. So we're going to start with William Newton Byers. He is the founder of Hot Sulphur Springs. He originally is the founder of Denver's Rocky Mountain News, and he came to Middle Park in 1860, and he located the hot springs here. And he planned on turning the area into a tourist resort community, and he founded the town, and he was going to call it Saratoga West, but later in 1863, the name was changed to Hot Sulphur Springs. He bought the land in 1864 and laid out the town streets. So I'm going to start with this photograph because it's the earliest photograph that I can find of Hot Sulphur Springs. This is looking south over what is now the resort. And I haven't been able to take a now picture of it, but anyway, I just also wanted to mention that the first cabin built at Hot Sulphur Springs by a white man was that of Charlie Utter. He was a hunter and trapper, and he built this cabin in 1860. So here is where I'm going to start my actual then and now photographs. And this was a picture that was taken in 1871 of the resort from across the river. And I just wanted to mention that one notable visitor to this area was John Wesley Powell. He and his family came to this area in 1867 at the invitation of William Newton Byers. And he was sitting around one evening with several of his cohorts there. And he was a Civil War veteran of the Union Army. He lost his arm. And he was an engineer and an explorer. And during that time, he actually came up with the idea and planned out his trip down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. And he was the first person to lead a party through the Grand Canyon on a boat. And it's a very famous and well-documented trip. And later, he actually took a group of people from Hot Sulphur Springs there, back upstream, past Grand Lake, and up to Longs Peak. And it's the first recorded ascent of Longs Peak. And this is what it looks like today. One more little story. There's a person here that homesteaded here by the name of Joseph Westcott. He was also known as Judge Westcott, although to anybody's knowledge, he didn't have any law background. But he served in the Union Army during the Civil War, and he had developed a severe case of rheumatism and had heard that the springs here could help heal him. So he came up around 1867, homesteaded some land, and he came for that purpose. And later on, he sold that claim for $500, at which time he traveled upstream the Colorado, and he's known as the first person who built a permanent residence on Grand Lake. These next three photos were taken from the same spot. There's a little rocky outcropping just south of the resort, and this first one was taken in 1877 by William Chamberlain, who was the first real professional photographer in Colorado. And he took this looking south down Byers Canyon. And then you'll see that the next one was taken here in 1901 by Harry Lake, another well-known photographer of the time. And then the last one, as you can see that there's no train tracks or anything on this picture, but the last one here was taken by myself. And you can see the train tracks there and Highway 40 coming across on the left-hand side. So again, this is a very well-known place to be taking pictures. Speaking of that spot, this photo was taken in 1881 by William Henry Jackson. He was known as one of the most prolific and well-known photographers of his day in the late 1800s. He took pictures of that small rock from that small rock outcropping, and it was looking east over the Hot Sulphur Springs Valley. And his biggest claim to fame was that he was part of the Hayden Expedition in the early 1870s, which was part of the United States Geological Survey, and his photographs actually helped form the basis for the creation of Yellowstone National Park. And then a couple of years later, he would come down through Colorado with the same expedition. Now, he fell in love with the place and ended up staying here and having a photography business in Denver. And so as we move on, so this picture was taken in 1888, and obviously it shows a footbridge from the south side of the river over to the resort. And I wanted to mention that there was a man by the name of the Earl of Dunraven, and he had come to Colorado from his native England, and he tried to purchase the area, what is now known as Estes Park, as his own private hunting grounds. Well, that didn't work out, but at one point during that trip, he came to Grand County, and he stayed at Hot Sulphur Springs here, camped here, to use as a base for his hunting trips. And of course, this is what it looks like today. So now I'm going to move on to a picture taken on the north side of Berthoud Pass in 1892. The story goes is that Edward Berthoud, in July of 1861, was asked to survey this area, the pass which now bears his name, along with mountain man Jim Bridger. They were trying to survey a railroad route from Denver to Salt Lake City, but it seemed that this was deemed to be too steep for railroads, and so it was developed as a wagon trail and ultimately as a 3-lane Highway 40, which is the main entrance into Grand County from the east. This picture was taken in 1892 of the Cousins Ranch in between Winter Park and Fraser. Now, before 1874, Billy Cousins was the sheriff of Central City, and from what I understand, he was quite a tough guy to deal with. But then he met a woman by the name of Mary, and they were going to get married, and they decided that Central City was not a good place to raise a family. So in 1874, Billy moved his family and homesteaded this property. Now, it's in between Fraser and Winter Park, but he had quite a bit of land in that area. One story is that during the late 1800s, when the railroad was being built and surveyed over Rollins Pass and down into the Fraser Valley, he would sit on his porch and he would take his rifle and shoot at the surveyors. Now, he never intended to hit anybody. He just wanted to scare them off because he didn't like the idea of a railroad being built too close to his property. So that's why the railroad tracks are clear across the valley from where his home is. And speaking of this, the current site of the Cousins Ranch Museum, one of the museums run by the Grand County Historical Association, and it's been a part of their museum group for quite some time, and really gives you a flavor of what it used to be like to live in the 1870s and 1880s. And there's a room for Doc Susie and a few other places. So it's you really, if you haven't been there, you owe it to yourself to go and check it out. Now, one more little story here is if you see in this picture, there's a little red and silver motorcycle right out front, and that used to be mine. And one day I was going to take this picture, and I drove up and parked my bike there, and I climbed up right off the highway to take this picture. And a little lady who walked out of the front door, and she came up and kind of looked at me like, "What are you doing here?" And so I ended up showing her what I was doing and why I was doing it. And that lady was Christy Martin, and she used to be the curator there, and that's how I began my association with the Grand County Historical Association. And we started working together on a project back in 2015 as a celebration of the 100th anniversary of Rocky Mountain National Park. So here is a picture of the resort taken in 1895 from that very famous now rock outcropping there south of the resort. But I wanted to mention a story that in 1866, William Newton Byers wrote a little piece in the Middle Park Times that the well known chief Ouray was brought here via a sling in between two horses and several companions, and he came all the way from the Montrose area. His body has been so racked with rheumatism, or what they called that at the time, that he couldn't walk on his own. So for several days, weeks actually, he was brought to the springs and nursed back to health to the point where he could actually walk on his own. And he left to go back to his people in the Montrose area, but before he left, he signed the door of the hot springs, and it's one of the few times that his signature is documented. And he actually has his own stained glass window at the state capitol because of his relationship with the people of Colorado. And I wanted to include Kremling in my presentation. So the story goes is that Rudolf Kremling came to the confluence of the Blue River and the Colorado River in the late 1870s. In 1888, there was a general store, and the town was incorporated in 1904. The railroad came in 1906, and the economy was basically based on supplying the ranches in the area, although there is a growing number of tourist-related businesses there now. And the reason I use this photo is because these two photos, Jim used, I met 10 years ago, and he was part of that project for the Rocky Mountain National Park. And he used his family's homestead on the south side of the Colorado River from Kremling. And his family's been there ever since. And Jim owns that property. And this is a picture of what it looks like today. Now, Grand County has had its darker side, just like any place. And this particular property is related to an incident that you've already heard about in the proclamation. But in 1873, Thomas Dean built the original portion of this home and opened up the public house, which of course is basically a bar. Now, he was a registered attorney, and he was also, therefore, appointed as the first judge of Grand County in 1881. And in 1881, the county seat was moved to Grand Lake, and this created quite a bit of animosity between the two towns. And on the 4th of July, 1883, it boiled over. Dean was staying at the Fairview House on the west end of Grand Lake, and he was participating in an effort to oust the county commissioners and get the county seat back to Hot Sulphur. Anyway, as he was exiting the hotel after breakfast, he and two of his companions were ambushed by three gentlemen from Grand Lake, including the sheriff and the undersheriff. And Dean and his compadres were shot, and they returned some fire, killing one of the assailants. But at one point, all three of the Hot Sulphur representatives were mortally wounded, as well as one of the assailants. Now, the other two assailants, one escaped to Georgetown, where he committed suicide out of guilt, and the other escaped to Utah, and it is alleged that his body was found there, but nobody has ever been able to prove that. And Dean is buried in the Hot Sulphur Springs Cemetery, just east of town. Now, shortly after this event, Walter McQuarrie purchased the Dean home and remodeled it with his mother to the point of what you pretty much see today. They were instrumental in getting the stagecoach line to come to Hot Sulphur, which then delivered the mail and tourists to the area. And now it's open as the Dean Public House. Another dark story is associated with this house in Grand Lake. Warren and Mary Gregg moved to Colorado in 1888. They had 6 children, but the second child died in infancy. This caused Mary a great deal of grief. Warren would often go on hunting trips and exploring the area, leaving Mary and her children in a very desolate place with little interaction with others, especially in the winter. So when Warren built this house around 1890, and this clearly showed his construction abilities with these beautiful spider web like woodwork. In 1904, while her husband and older son were away, the grief got to be too much for her and the isolation, so she took a gun, killed herself and her remaining children. Now, as the story goes, they are buried in the Grand Lake Cemetery, and this is still a private residence today. So, returning back to Hot Sulphur, the railroad arrived here in the spring of 1905, and it effectively put the stagecoach line out of business. And this is a picture of the last stage to ever leave Hot Sulphur, picture taken in 1907. And then this is what it looks like today. Hopefully, this gentleman in the Jeep is not the last time he ever visited Hot Sulphur. Anyway, so as we move on here, you can see the Hot Sulphur Springs Resort in 1907. As mentioned before, William Newton Byers started the resort, but his son Frank ran it for several years and has gone through several ownership changes, but it's been a constant place where people can go for vacations and relaxation and healing. And that's what it looks like today. So here is a picture taken in 1909 from behind the resort looking over Hot Sulphur Springs. And if you look down in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a little train depot there. And I just wanted to mention as we go to the next slide that the folks at the resort have always been very good to me about allowing me to go on their property and take these pictures. So this picture was taken in 1909, looking east from the resort, and you can see a little footbridge in the middle there, which allowed people to get over from Hot Sulphur town to the resort. And this is what it looks like today. So the next picture we have is of the Hot Sulphur Spring Community Church. This picture was taken in 1910. This church was built in 1904, and it is the oldest church that's been in continuous use in Grant County. Now, I do want to show something. If you go back to the original picture, you can see that that was the picture and there's nothing behind it. And now if we go back to the new picture, you're going to see that there's a portico built on the front of it. And of course, there's several houses and such in the background. The next photograph is of Harry Lake. Harry Lake was a well-known photographer in the late 1800s and 1900s. And here he is sitting on the Colorado River. And if you notice here in the next show, the next slide, that it's the same spot today, and you'll see a young man right in the middle, very small, but he's a fly fisherman, because this is a very well-known spot for fishing on the Colorado River. And now, I'm going to do things a little backwards on this one. I've seen these pylons for a bridge many times, and I always wonder what they were about. So now I'm going to the picture that I've got here. This was a picture of the old Red Bridge in 1911. Now, the history behind this was given to me by a gentleman by the name of Don Daly, and he is a wealth of information about Hot Sulphur Springs and that whole area. But anyway, he told me that this is the old Red Bridge, was built in 1875 as a collaboration between John Rollins and William Newton Byers. And it was originally a toll bridge for the Rollinsville Middle Park Reagan Road. And the building of it was supervised by a gentleman by the name of John Himmelbaugh, and he was a stonemason. And his story goes is that all the stone was quarried right near here, and it was put in place by hand. There was no machinery used to put this all together, and then the decking was put on later on. So then, and as we go back to the modern picture, this bridge allowed people to cross the river, and then there, if you follow it, there's a road that goes up and over the hill, and that actually goes over the little pass there and comes down into Parshall. So this was done before there was ever any railroad tracks or Highway 40 built through Byers Canyon, and that was the one way that you could get to Parshall and beyond. So that's the story behind that old red bridge. So this next picture was taken in 1911 of the train depot at Hot Sulphur Springs. Now, the Denver Northwest and Pacific Railway, also known as the Moffett Road, began in 1904. And it was David Moffat's dream to have a direct route from Denver to Salt Lake. But the first obstacle he had to do was go over Rollins Pass. Now that they did that, but of course that's a really difficult thing, especially in the winter. So it was always his dream to build a tunnel underneath that to reach out. Now he died before that could happen, and yet in 1927 his dream was fulfilled, and the Moffett Tunnel was opened, and it's still in use today. And this is what that spot looks like now. And as we move on, this picture was taken in 1920. And as you can see here, that at one point, Hot Sulphur Springs had a pretty thriving downtown. There's a bank over in the middle of the picture there. And there is one building that's left in this picture, and that's the Riverside Hotel. But as you can see, most of those buildings are no longer there. Hopefully, we can see a resurgence there. But that's what progress does sometimes. So the next picture was taken of Byers Canyon in 1920. And as you see, this is looking south. And you can see the railroad there. And actually, the auto road was built by that time as well. And then we will see, and it will transform into what it looks like today. And that same spot there. And now we'll move on to the Riverside Hotel. And this picture was taken in 1921. And at the time, the Riverside Hotel, it was built in 1903 and included a cafe and a stable. And now, from what I understand, it's a private residence. And but it's a beautiful building. So now as we move on, you can see a picture of the Granby train depot in 1925. Granby was a product of the railroad, but now I guess it's actually the most populous town in the county. And we can see as we move on that the picture here will change, and you can see what it looks like today. And as we move on now to the next slide. So now we're going back to Byers Canyon, but this is on the far side of the canyon looking north back towards Hot Sulphur. And the interesting thing about this picture is that if you look in the middle there, the Colorado River, there's a little levee or a small little dam there. And the water behind it is very calm and peaceful. And then the water, as it comes over that, turns into quite a bit of white water there. And as you move forward to the picture taken of it in this day, you can see the same thing. The water behind it is peaceful and calm, and then as it rushes over, it turns into some white water there. And I just find it fascinating that that has remained over the last 100+ years. So this picture was taken of the resort in 1926 from the south side of the river. And as we move on, we can see what it looks like today. So as we see it, what it looks like here, I have to mention that I had to go take my car quite a ways away up the backside of the mountain there on Hutzelfer and then hike down to this spot. But it was worth it because I did get several good pictures from here. Now we've got the Hot Sulphur Springs School. It was built in 1924 and it served the Hot Sulphur Springs area for 50 years. And then in 1974, it became the Pioneer Village Museum, and it's also the headquarters of the Grant County Historical Association. And this is the depository for all of the manuscript and photography archives of Grant County. And now this is what it looks like today. And it's a wonderful museum, and they keep it well. The displays moving through, and there's other buildings that they brought onto that campus. So if you haven't seen it, please take some time and go check it out. So this is an interesting picture. This was taken in 1934, and it shows 3 of the Grant County courthouses all in one place. Over on the right-hand side, down in the middle, there was the original courthouse of Grant County. It was built in 1878, and then in 1901, a formal courthouse was built, and that's the white structure in the middle. And then on the left, you can see the present courthouse building with the offices of the county. But as we move forward here, I want you to notice the building on the left of those, where those 6 windows are. And as we fade into the current picture, you will see that that part of the building is still there, and now the other things have been taken down, and the rest of the buildings have been added on to the county offices there. And now we get into the Winter Carnival. Now, this picture was taken in 1934, but it shows that they had winter activities in Hot Sulphur. And of course, the first Winter Carnival was held in 1911, which is the first Winter Carnival west of the Mississippi. And this was considered to be the beginning of the ski industry in Colorado. They had ski jumping, cross-country skiing, and tobogganing, and especially they had an exhibition by Carl Howelson, and he became quite a popular figure in the county of that time. In 1908, President Teddy Roosevelt created the Arapahoe National Forest, and it was set up for the forest rangers to have their offices and residence here in Hot Sulphur. And so in 1938, these 2 buildings were built. The one on the left was the office, and one on the right was the residence for the ranger. And so later on, they moved that office to Granby, and this is what it looks like today. And now those buildings are the offices of the Grant County Social Services. So at this time, I just wanted to say thank you. That's the end of my presentation. And I want to say thanks again to the Grant County Board of County Commissioners, to Samantha and Christy for helping set this up. And I also wanted to mention the sources of my historical notes. They came from many sources, including the Grant County website, the Grant County Historical Association website, Mr. Don Daly, the newspapers of the Middle Park Times back in the day, and there's a book called Grand Lake in the Olden Days by Mary Lyons Carnes, which is an excellent book, and also the Go Grand book of tours around Grant County, which was supplied by the Grant County Historical Association. So thank you very much, and I hope this has been helpful and entertaining, and maybe you may have even learned something. Thanks a lot.